Hello, Latin homies. We are now going to be looking at Chapter 3 of Jenney's and talking about the grammar there and some features of the vocabulary. So you might want to take a look at page 15 and look at it along with me. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the verb sum esse, which is the verb to be, and it's kind of an odd verb in many ways. It's, as they say in English, it's not an action verb, it's a being verb, or it's a linking verb. There's different ways to talk about it. The main thing to remember is that both in English and in Latin, this verb is irregular. We have already learned first conjugation verbs in the present tense, right? We've learned amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatus, amant, and we have learned the persons and numbers that go with that, first, second, and third person, singular and plural, and all of those endings. The persons and numbers are the same for the verb sum esse, to be, first person, second person, and third person, singular and plural. I, you singular, he, she, it, we, you plural, and they. But although there are some similarities in the endings that can help you remember them, they are actually irregular in form, just like in English. You say I love, you love, he, she, it loves. There's an ending change, right? Okay, that corresponds to the first conjugation verbs that we've been studying. But we don't say something similar when we use the verb to be. We say I am, you are, he is. In other words, the forms of the verb are peculiar to the verb itself. They're not really very much like anything else. So basically, you have to memorize the paradigm and you have to memorize the verb forms. And fortunately, there are only 6 of them, and you can see them right here on the top of page 15. So it's a good thing to say them over and over again to yourself if you don't know them. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt. I am, you singular are, he, she, is, we are, you plural are, and they are. Okay? So how do you use this verb? Well, generally you're going to see it linked to something else. This goes back to the first chapter. Remember when we were dealing with the nominative case, we dealt with 2 forms of this verb already. We dealt with est, and we said that means he, she, it is, but also means there is. And we dealt with sunt, and that means they are or there are in the plural. So we memorized those forms as vocabulary words, and we talked about predicate nominatives, right? So predicate nominatives are things that kind of look a little bit in terms of the shape of the sentence as if they were direct objects, but they're not. Remember that when you're using a direct object, the direct object is the receiver of the action of the verb, and it's not the same person as the subject. So if you say the student sees the teacher, then the student is the subject, seeing is the verb, and the receiver of the seeing, the one who is seen, is the teacher. So direct object, person A performs the action of a verb on person B. But remember from chapter 1, when we hadn't yet talked about the accusative case and how to use it for direct objects, we talked about predicate nominatives, which are linked by est or sunt, right? So forms of the verb to be, forms of sum esse. So here we're coming back to that lesson again and reinforcing it. So if you want to say the student calls the teacher, right? Then you would say discipula vocat magistra. So you don't need to worry about the noun forms right there. But the point is the subject calls the direct object. If you want to say the student is a teacher, or let's use our vocabulary and say the girl is a farmer, you would say, if you wanted to say the girl calls a farmer, you'd say puella vocat agricolam, right? You'd put that in the accusative case. But if you wanted to say the girl is a farmer, then you would say puella est agricola, and you'd keep that in the nominative case. That's called a predicate nominative. Anything on the other side of that verb is typically going to be called a predicate. So you can have predicate adjectives as well. So we haven't really been using adjectives very much, but you could say, so bona means good. You could say puella est bona, and that would be the girl is good, and you'd put good in the same case as puella. We won't worry about that too much. So predicate nominatives. Remember the meaning of there is. So this is under the uses of sum. There is or there are. If you don't see a noun subject, look at the first, under the uses of sum, the first sentence in the second pair, after where it says in the third person, etc. The first is est aqua, and you could look at that and you might say, it is water? Well, that might work. But another thing that it might mean is there is water. So if you see, if you don't see what looks like a subject, you just see what looks like a predicate nominative, try translating est or sunt as there is or there are, as we learned as a vocabulary in the first chapter. Okay, the next heading is the ablative of place where. Okay, so if you want to say that something is on or in something, then you need to use a preposition in Latin. Okay, remember what prepositions are? They are little small words, usually, that show relationships between things. So, for example, on, under, by, with. The other kind of little small word that you can confuse them with is pronouns, which are different. He, she, it, that, things that take the place of a noun. But if you're on the table, under the table, by the table, you see you're showing relationships of, for, from, all those kinds of words are prepositions. One thing to remember in Latin is that prepositions always take cases. So think about prepositions as governing nouns that come after them, right? In other words, if you say on the table, on is governing, grammatically speaking, the table. And that doesn't make very much difference in English, but it makes a big difference in Latin, because the words that a preposition governs are going to be either in accusative or ablative, those two A cases, okay? So most prepositions only take one case. So, for example, contra takes the accusative case. That means against. So if you were to look in your glossary here, the little mini dictionary at the end, if you were to see on page 476 is where it says contra, it's going to say plus ac, right? So, or preposition with ac, either one. So that means this takes the accusative case, anything that it governs, anything that, if you're fighting against the enemy, then you're going to put the enemy in the accusative case because it's governed by post. That's getting a little bit ahead of the lesson, but if you understand the framework about prepositions, I always say the things to remember about prepositions, prepositions take cases, right? They either take the accusative, or they take the ablative, or in some instances, there are a couple of prepositions that take sometimes accusative and sometimes ablative. That's unusual. In is one of them. But right now we're talking about using the Latin preposition in, which means in or on, to show place where, rather than place to which we'll talk about later. Okay, if you're using the Latin preposition in to meaning a place where, like something is in a house or on a mountain, right? So if you're doing that, then you're going to use the ablative case with it. So look at the examples here. In silva est. Okay, that's using this the verb to be sum, right? So this is the third person singular form, he, she, it is, or there is. So est, they're translating it as he is. You could translate it as she is. He is in the forest, in silva. Notice the A at the end of silva has a macron over the top of it. That means it's in the ablative case. Okay? So you'll always, if you're translating from English to Latin, anything governed by in has to be in the ablative case because in takes the ablative if it's place where, okay, as opposed to place to which we'll get to in another In other words, there's no motion. If you're just sitting still, then it's place where, and it takes the ablative. Okay, look at the second sentence here. In insula pugnamus. We fight, or we are fighting, either one. We fight on the island. You could say we fight in the island, but we don't talk that way in English. That's why they say in means in or on, and you have to play with the sentence in order to figure it out. Okay, so what have we got so far? How to use the verb, what the form of the verb sum is, the morphology, the changes in the form of the verb, the paradigm, right? And how to use it, thinking about predicate nominatives, right? And thinking about translating it as there is or there are. Ablative of place where, using it with a preposition in plus ablative. And now we're going to talk about questions. But these aren't just any kind of questions. These are turning a statement into a question. You have to think about it that way. Okay, there are different kinds of questions. A lot of questions begin with what we call interrogatives, question words, and that tells you right there it's a question. And this is true in Latin too. Okay, if you want to say where is it, you would say ubi est, and you don't need to do anything but put that question word there. We can also have a statement. Say we have a statement. He is happy, right? And you want to turn that into a question because you don't know whether it's true or not. Then what do you do in English? You reverse the word order, right? He is happy is a statement turned into a question. Is he happy? Okay, so that's how we make a question out of a statement in English. Remember, this doesn't apply if you're using interrogatives. So in Latin, I'm going to say this at the beginning because we'll see how it doesn't apply in some other cases. In Latin, if you don't expect that the answer is going to be yes or no, you really don't know what the answer is. You don't know whether he's happy or not, something like that, right? So if you don't know what the answer is and you're turning a statement into a question, the way you do that is you put what's called an enclitic particle at the end of the first word, which means kind of a suffix tacked on the end. And the only thing that that means is this is a question. Okay? So you can see if you look on page 15 at the bottom that the enclitic particle is NE. Okay? So let's look at the example. On top of page 16, Galliane est provincia. Okay, and they say that means is Gaul a province? Is Gaul a province? So if you are actually trying to translate that from English, what I would advise you to do as a first step is to forget the ne and forget that it's a question and translate it as a statement and then turn it into a question. So Galliane est provincia. That's what's down there. Drop the ne and just say Gallia est provincia. And you would translate that. Provincia is a predicate nominative, right? Because it's got some linking it. So Gaul is a province. Now, how would you make that a question in English? That's what we need to add the ne in, right? So then it's not Gaul is a province, but is Gaul a province? Because it's reversing the word order and putting the verb first that makes it a question in English when you're transforming a statement into a question. Same thing for the second one. Sunt ne literae. Okay. Sunt literae, if we drop the ne, would mean there are letters. I mean, if you can say letters are, but that doesn't really make any sense. So that's why you have to play with translation and see if you can come out with the best and most sensible answer, because there's different ways of translating. So there are letters, or even there is a letter, right? Because the plural of literae means letter. It depends what kind of letters you mean, but A, B, C, D, there are letters like that. So then put the ne back in. Are there letters, right? Or is there a letter would be the way you translate it. So then they talk a little bit about another enclitic particle. Here, this is a vocabulary issue. After that, it's in the vocabulary list, que here, enclitic conjunction. So there's nothing confusing about this. It's less confusing than ne once you get it. Que, stuck on the end of a word, is the same thing as et. It means and, right? So if you wanted to say the girl and the farmer, you could say puella et agricola. But you could also say puella agricolaque, and just stick that a on the end, and then you pull it off, translate it as and join the two things together. All right, so one more thing, right? We have covered the morphology of sum, the paradigm, the forms of it, right? We have covered how to use it, especially with predicate nominatives and predicate adjectives, right? We've talked about the ablative of place where, the preposition in plus ablative. We've talked about how to make a statement into a question using nay at the end. How to translate it as a statement first and drop the nay, then put the nay back in and translate it as a question, and how that works. We've talked about how you don't need to do that if you're using a question word, an interrogative like who, what, where, when, things like that. Nay doesn't come into it. It's just a question of turning a statement into a question where you don't know whether the answer is going to be yes or no. So one more thing is also on page 16 under helps or hints. This is a feature of Latin that seems peculiar to a lot of people. So Latin does not have words for yes or no, which is kind of baffling to a lot of English speakers when they first encounter it. So the most common way, there are various ways of getting around that. If you want to answer a question and you're looking to say, oh, I want to say yes, but I can't. There's no word for yes. So the way around it, suppose you wanted to, you asked a question and you wanted to say, does he love me? Okay, so we want to make that into a question. So first we're going to make it a statement. He loves me, right? Amat me. You don't know the word may yet, but it's easy enough to understand. So amat me. He loves me. Now we want to make that into a question. We're going to put nay at the end of the first word, that inclitic particle that signals a question. So amat ne me, right? So does he love me? Loves he me? Now we want to answer it. Let's say we want to say yes, but there's no word for yes. So we repeat the verb. He loves. Amat. That's how you would say it. Or if the answer is no, non amat. He does not love. So repeat the verb and add a non if the answer is no. That's the way to say yes or no in Latin. Okay, that's the end of the lesson for Chapter 3. And I will see you guys later today. Or if I have already talked to you, then hopefully this shores up your understanding of the grammatical issues in this chapter. Thanks. Bye.